Welcome, everyone. We're going to give it just a moment for people to get logged in. We're so glad that you're here. If you have a question right off the bat, you can type it into the Q&A. We'll go over our Zoom settings in just a moment. We'll give it another 30 seconds and then we'll get going.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much.
Of course, I apologize for being late.
It's okay. No worries. We are going to start in just a moment. We have lots of people joining us. Okay. It is 1:02, so we'll go ahead and jump in. So thank you, everyone, for joining today's training on enhancing your client advocate relationships, navigating literacy and cultural challenges when serving Afghan clients. This training is presented to you by Switchboard. Switchboard is a one-stop resource hub for refugee service providers in the United States. We'll go over our Zoom settings for today. It's a Zoom webinar, so you are joining on listening only mode. Due to the large number of learners on today's webinar, we've disabled the chat box. However, you do have the option to send messages to the speakers and co-facilitators via the Q&A. Keep an eye on the chat for messages from Switchboard and links to various resources that we'll mention throughout. Today's webinar will run for about 60 minutes and it is being recorded. You'll receive an email with the recording, slides, and recommended resources within 24 hours. The webinar transcript, along with the recording, will be posted on the Switchboard website within the following days. Lastly, we ask that you kindly complete our webinar satisfaction survey at the conclusion of our session. This short 3-question survey helps us here at Switchboard continuously improve our training and technical assistance offerings to you all. So today's facilitator is me, Ashley DeJory, and I'm the program manager for Vicina's Afghan projects. I've been involved with Vicina and with immigration since 2021, and I am a DOJ accredited representative. More importantly, today's speakers, we have Kristen Nilsen, who joins Vicina from private practice. For the past 5 years, she has run a solo practice in Northern California, helping clients navigate our complex immigration laws. She previously worked with other organizations to provide low-cost legal assistance to refugees. Kristen has ample experience mentoring and training legal students and representatives, and worked as an immigration services officer with USCIS before transitioning to work with refugees. We also have Harriet Amelia Wessel, who is an associate with Norton Rose Fulbright in Houston, Texas. She is a pro bono attorney volunteer with Vicina. She recently worked on an asylum case with an Afghan client with low literacy and successfully navigated the challenges she and her client faced throughout the process, and her client received a grant of asylum in September 2023. She has taken on another case with us at Vicina as well. We also have McLean, who is a passionate immigrant advocate and a DOJ accredited representative with Vicina. She is an August 2021 graduate of Villanova's VISTA program and has assisted with numerous applications for Afghan clients, including humanitarian parole and asylum applications, as well as applications for temporary protected status. She continues to volunteer with Vicina as an accredited representative and with Team Themis as a volunteer advocate. And we also have Ahmad Osmani, who is an Afghan national and graduate of Kabul Medical University. He currently works as a case manager with the State Department's care team as an interpreter for Afghan clients. He previously worked as an operation coordinator for Afghan newcomers in the US and as a cultural advisor for 2-star Marine generals in Afghanistan. And so today's learning objectives, by the end of today's session, you will be able to name strategies for conducting efficient, culturally appropriate intakes for potential Afghan clients with low literacy levels, be able to communicate more clearly with Afghan clients about the requirements for immigration benefits, and ask linguistically accessible questions to gather information from Afghan clients in order to better prepare their cases. So with that, as we learned today, we would love for you to be a part of our conversations. We're going to use Slido to help engage all of us in today's discussions. So if all the participants could please take a moment to scan the QR code on the screen or click the link in the chat to join our Slido and share your thoughts in just a moment. So you can use the QR code, or if you go to slido.com, it'll ask you to input the code, which is in the chat and also on the screen. Just watching the clock to give everyone time to log in. All right, we can go ahead to the question. And the QR code and information is also on the screen. Great. So as we frame our discussions for today, we were hoping you could share some of the challenges you might have faced working specifically with Afghan clients. Each culture has their own characteristics and experiences that make our interactions with them different from our interactions with other cultures. So please share your thoughts using the Slido. We've got a quick person already: mental health misconceptions, out-migration when arriving solo, language barriers, wow, distrustful of staff, language, yeah. False information spreads quickly, for sure. Gender norms, anxiety and trauma, speaking languages that aren't readily available. So many great ideas. Transportation, that's a new one. Altering documents, engaging with the family, domestic violence, men making decisions for their wives, gender norms, yeah. Mental health again. I like that Slido gives us a little overview, which we can all see: language, culture, gender, men and women, mental health. So we'll be talking about a lot of this in today's presentation. I don't want to cut anyone off. Oh, perfect. Okay. So again, thank you for sharing your thoughts. Those are all really helpful. And our hope today is to help you find ways to overcome some of those challenges. We believe that by conducting intakes that are culturally appropriate, linguistically accessible, and efficient, you'll be able to communicate more clearly with Afghan clients about the requirements for immigration benefits, ask better questions, and gather better information in order to prepare your clients' cases. So with that, we will begin today's discussion talking about the Afghan culture. So Ahmad, would you share some important aspects of the Afghan culture with us, please?
Of course, Miss Ashley. Thank you so much, and salam to everyone. I would like to thank Miss Ashley and other speakers for giving me the opportunity to represent the Afghan culture today. Um, As we all know, Afghan people are known for their hospitality. In addition, Islam plays a significant role in the Afghan culture. Family is also highly valued in Afghan culture. Preserving family honor and respect is deeply rooted in Afghan culture. And also, in order to build relationship with Afghan client, it is essential to acknowledge culture and linguistic barrier. We can accomplish this by utilizing interpreters, avoid jargon, and involving family members if needed. Um, it is also crucial to be mindful of Afghan culture norms and, more importantly, gender role and a power dynamic. I have worked for many years as an culture advisor in Afghanistan and also interpreter in here in the stateside. Throughout my work, I encountered situations where medical questions asked to the female and replied by the male. This is not a culture. This is just but a typical mindset. Um, which should be noted when we working with Afghan clients. Also, due to lack of education, some Afghan is struggling with providing information, some of their personal basic information, which can be a challenge to our advocate. I believe we can build trust and ensure that Afghan clients with low literacy level feel comfortably share their experiences.
Thank you so much. I had a minor mute issue.
Of
Thank
course.
you. Marianne, would you mind sharing how you've experienced these cultural aspects in your work? But before you jump on, Ahmad, I'm so sorry. We see in the question and answer that your video's not clear. I don't know if you're able to turn off your virtual background so that it clears it up a little bit while Marianne shares her thoughts, please.
Of course.
Yes, thank you for including me on the panel. Certainly the responses that populated the Slido are most of those are experiences that I've had in dealing with Afghan clients. They're all very real issues. I'll just call out a couple that I've experienced recently, and we can certainly discuss more in depth later. The gender role issue is certainly something very important, and I actually experienced it on a case where the client had some sort of issue with our interpreter over Zoom. The interpreter was a woman, the client was a man, and it was either because of a linguistic barrier or some sort of cultural barrier. They had an off-site discussion, not off-site, but a sidebar discussion in which something happened and she had to leave because it was too upsetting for her, something he said to her. So there are these challenges sometimes that have to be dealt with. And another issue, we've found that drawing out the story from a client can be challenging, either because of trauma or they're not accustomed to being asked questions in this way before and having to illuminate their story in depth. And of course, we want to get as much depth of their story as possible. So there's some techniques, which I think we'll talk about, to getting really a good, clear story. With respect to illiterate clients, we certainly have had that experience, and preparing them for their interviews is very challenging. Often we like to give a cheat sheet to them for to prepare them and to review before their interview. If they can't read, then that's a challenge. So that takes extra time and preparation to prepare them. And lastly, I'll just say on the linguistic aspect, I have a client right now who speaks Dari, and Google Translate doesn't work very well for Dari. So these are just things to experience in a day-to-day life and of an advocate. So I'll stop there, and of course can illuminate more later.
Thank you for sharing all of that, Marianne. So thank you. Now we'll go ahead and we're going to jump to a Slido again. So we're going to follow this case scenario throughout today's session as we talk about these different topics. So thinking about Afghan culture, we have a not real client, Farzad. This is a pretend situation, but something you could encounter. Farzad, an Afghan newcomer who entered the US with humanitarian parole in August 2023, comes to your office for an intake. While speaking with you, Farzad is unable to identify precise dates, such as dates of birth or when the Taliban came to search his house. In what ways might this affect the preparation of the case? So on the next slide, we'll see the Slido. Okay, I got nervous there. Please share your thoughts, participants, and of course, our panelists will jump in as well. But how might the not being able to identify precise dates affect preparation of a case when working with an Afghan client? Clarity, for sure. It could be because of a lack of trust. So I'm going to address the one question really quick. Why are we asking him about deep trauma? If he's coming in to a legal provider to access legal services, to maybe apply for asylum, like someone just said, we have to get into those details, and it's really important to include specific details. So yeah, that would cause difficulty filling out applications. It could cause issues in an interview, like Mary Ann said. Perfect. So while we have some more of these thoughts coming in, participants or panelists, I apologize, panelists, what do you think about these ideas, or do you have any strategies to add? And please don't be sorry, participants.
Actually, I have had this experience in the interview situation where USCIS decided to give my client a date of birth because he wasn't able to provide his own. And I think that for the client was perhaps not a particularly nice situation, because he felt he was being, given something by the government that is, unique to him, and he has a date of birth and he has, that somewhere, but he wasn't able to communicate. So I just think that's something for us to remember. People come with, their own identity, and you're imposing one on them if they're not able to communicate that. So just something to bear in mind.
No, I like that. I didn't think about that it's, a part of their identity that we're just throwing at them. And I can't believe this one comment. We have adults listed as teenagers. I've heard of minor discrepancies, like a couple years maybe, but not like big gaps there. Someone says many Afghans don't keep records of dates of birth. Ahmad, have you found that to be consistent in the Afghan culture?
Yes, that is so true, and I've been encountered that a lot during the past 2 years, especially when I was working in a project through the Providencia with the some of the shelters around the United States. A lot of minors, they were actually adult, but they listed as a teenage, maybe under 18. And this is the one issue that we don't, it is not a culture, but again, due to 4 decades of war in Afghanistan, so people do not getting records of their children's date of birth, and also at the hospital, which is OB hospitals, they don't provide such a documentation, or they're not registered on the spot.
Yes, thank you. I'm so sorry. I'm having issues with unmuting here, but perfect. Yes. And someone says 1 year is a birth date for most of our clients. I feel like that's something that's come up as well. So something we just want to clarify, like we're not trying to generalize all of the Afghans, that every Afghan is like this, just kind of some common themes that we're seeing, or some aspects that seem to be true in many cases. So we could probably talk about this forever, but we'll go ahead and keep going so that we can get to all of the topics. Just to give you some general tips for culturally appropriate intakes, where possible, match the provider and client gender. So a female client with a female provider, same for males. Follow cultural norms for shaking hands and for other greetings. Ensure mutual understanding by summarizing meeting points and asking questions when uncertain. And establish trust by emphasizing confidentiality. We'll move on to our next main topic today, which is making sure we're using accessible language when speaking with clients. Kristen, can you share more about what this means and how you do this?
Sure. Thank you, Ashley. Nice to meet everybody today. To give some context, I've been working with Afghan clients since about 2017, so before the big evacuation. So I have a lot of context as far as how to interact with them. And I've worked with the people from Afghanistan with all sorts of language abilities, because obviously there are people who worked as translators, and there are people who are new and don't speak any English. So there's a lot of variation within the community. I think the most important thing when talking about making your interactions with your clients linguistically accessible is not to use big words like linguistically accessible. It's like that kind of jargon and that kind of those kind of large words that are very particular to English. that make it hard to understand. So in the context of immigration, when you're talking about, does somebody speak English, or do they understand English? You're talking about a third grade level, basically. That's the standard for being able to speak English in the immigration context. So when you're speaking with clients, keep that in mind. You're going to have people who are very, very good at English, much better at English than I am any of the other languages I speak. And then, they're going to be able to communicate with them just fine. But there are other people you're going to want to take it back, think about, they're not a child, but think about how I would communicate this to a child, somebody who is not going to understand all the ins and outs of the language. We want to use communication that we can all understand. So we want to be clear in purpose, use plain language, don't use the jargon or the idioms. If you have like acronyms, immigration is very big on acronyms. Take time to define them. So don't just throw out like, we're going to do this with USCIS, or we have to go through DSHS to do all this. You want to take time to define what those agencies are. So we're going to be working with the immigration agency, or we're going to be working with human services, the people that oversee like all the benefits and the housing and things like that, and how these agencies, what they're going to do rather than just as their acronyms. And another important thing is to use consistent language. For me, I can be an attorney, I can be a lawyer, I can be all these different things. They all mean the same thing, but it can be confusing if I'm referring to myself as all these different things. So being consistent in the terms that we use. I also think that as far as working with Afghan clients is that it makes it much easier to communicate and to share our points with one another if we're comfortable with one another. So building rapport. I smile a lot. I'm very informal in my intakes and in working with my clients. I smile a lot. I cannot emphasize the importance of good greetings in Afghan culture. Putting your hand over your heart shows so much empathy and welcoming so that people are able to open up with you. And then there are just other things like we've touched on before, and we'll touch on again later on this, is re-emphasizing points, going over things over again. If you get a question you don't have the answer to, come back and step back and take a step back and say, okay, this is how they understood this question. How do I need to step back to get the answer I need? And so we'll show an example of that in just a moment, but I'm going to think that is it for me for now. And I think Ashley had a couple other points on this.
Thank you very much, Kristen. Harriet, do you have anything to add to Kristen's suggestions?
Yeah, I think all Kristen's suggestions are really, really helpful. The one thing that I found really helpful in terms of getting communication across to our Afghan clients is using Zoom or video calls. That helped me build trust. I had a male Afghan client who was a lot older than me, and in terms of the respect pyramid, definitely, older and a man. So it was important for him to understand that I was trying to meet him at his level. And when we would struggle with, the communication verbally, if we were waiting for the translator or if they left the room, he was able to see me smiling. And I always attempted to, dress as conservatively as possible to, show my respect for him. And I think that really helped us build a rapport. And so when he would have follow-up questions, or he would like to call me with a friend of his that wasn't a professional interpreter, he would video call me and we would have a video chat. So that's just something to think about. If you're comfortable, I think that can often help bridge some of those linguistic gaps as well.
That's a great point. Thank you. So now it's going to be everybody else's turn to chime in with some ideas. We'll revisit Farzad on the next slide. Perfect. So continuing with Farzad, you realize that he's likely eligible for asylum. When trying to get more details about his experiences in Afghanistan, he gives one-word answers. For example, when asked why he left Afghanistan, he said the Taliban and didn't give any other information. So what are some other questions you can ask to draw out more information? Or maybe what are things you can do to draw out more information? We'll jump to the next slide here, and we'll go back to our Slido. What do you all participants think? Oh no, this is the wrong, this is the wrong Slido here. Minor technical difficulty. Switchboard host, can you help us?
Yeah, I'm not, let's see, hold on a second. See if I
Our
can find it.
sincerest apologies. But you're getting a preview of our next topic in question.
Let's see. How's that? This is the only other one we're seeing here.
Oh my word. Okay, that could be an Ashley copying problem. If it's gonna come up on here, I guess we'll be okay. Just to reiterate what we I don't know what the best way to do this is.
I would encourage through the chat for as people to provide their feedback through the chat to us, and then you can read it as they go through.
Okay. Apologies for the technology difficulties. Can we go back to the slide that asks the question? And then yes, participants, I apologize for our Slido issues. If we go back one slide.
Sorry.
That's okay. Back.
Oh,
Case scenario number 2.
and this was the question that we did not want to.
Here we go. Here's the question. So yes, participants, if you can type in the chat, it will just come to myself and to our panelists, but we can read them out loud. Again, so sorry. But what are some other questions you can ask to draw out more information? Thank you so much for bearing with us. Oh, chat is disabled. I did not realize that. My sincerest apologies. Okay. I am going to just turn
It's
it
on
over
now.
to the
It's
panelists.
on now.
Actually, if
We
you'd
just-
like, I can just kind of pipe up
We
here.
just enabled it.
Oh, we just
We
enabled it.
enabled
So
that.
the chat is
Mhm.
open, but
So
yes,
that way-
Kristen, bridge the gap while people
Sure.
start sharing their ideas.
Yes.
So we're talking here about, when we're trying to talk about somebody's experiences in Afghanistan and why they qualify for asylum. And part of that is making sure that we're meeting the legal standard for that. And that is what happened to Afghanistan, what kind of experience and persecution did you experience, and why are you afraid to go back? So knowing the context of what's going on in Afghanistan is very important. Like, you need to be able to be like, if he says the Taliban, you have to kind of understand like what has happened in Afghanistan over the past 30 years, basically, and more recently over the past 2.5 years. So having that context saying, what have you ever encountered the Taliban? What happened when you encountered them? Did they do anything to you? How did you feel when you spoke to them? Did they ever hurt you? Did they ever hurt anybody in your family? Did you ever, receive any threats? Did they threaten you by phone? Did they threaten you by letter? Did they come to your house and threaten you? Did they ever physically harm you? Just asking all these things, all these follow-up questions. It's pretending like you're doing a very in-depth interview with somebody, because you are, but also like you just really want to get down to the very nitty details. You're not necessarily going to put all of that in a declaration or in, prep them to say all of that, but you want to have a good understanding and help them have a good understanding of why they left Afghanistan and why they would be afraid to go back.
Thank you, Kristen. Thank you. And I'm hoping everybody can see the chat and see some of these great ideas coming through. One I saw a lot was, can you tell me more about that? Definitely a good follow-up question. But some, like Kristen said, those more specific questions might help get more specific information, and then someone shared that I'd like to make sure we all see, give personal experiences, talk about yourself a bit, and allow them to get comfortable. Afghan clients need to connect with you on a human-to-human level before being able to truly open up to you. And I think that's a good tip for us to keep in mind. Do any panelists have anything else to hide? Oh no, you can't see the chat, everyone. Oh no. Okay, so yes,
They
there
can-
was a lot.
Ashley,
There was
they
a
can
lot.
communicate with you, with the panelists and yourself.
My apologies. So yes, can you tell, a lot of people said, can you tell me more about what did you do? Like what was your work situation? What about the Taliban made you feel like you need to leave? Were you able to work while you were in Afghanistan? Can you tell me why you're afraid? Why are you afraid of the Taliban? Is it on the basis of religion, political affiliation, and asking some more questions targeted to those topics? The personal experiences that I've already mentioned, asked to be more specific. Someone had a client in a similar situation, and they said, I know it can be hard to talk about what you experienced. The more information we have about what happened to you, the better the chance that we can get you help. Is it okay if I ask you more questions? And then taking a step back and asking those specific questions to build it up. For real panelists, does anyone have anything else to add? Okay, no worries. Still have some great ideas coming through the chat. Apologize. All right, we'll keep moving forward. The next Slido should work, so we should be good there. But wrapping up this linguistically accessible topic real quick, just some standard tips to take away. Clients may understand questions, but may give brief answers without background details. Ask yourself, what background information do I need? Plan multiple routes of inquiry to gain necessary information. And then again, paraphrase to check for mutual understanding. Always make sure that you are understanding what your client's saying and that they are understanding what you're saying. So now we'll jump into our last topic, communicating legal processes. And I will jump to Kristen again. Can you share a little bit about how you've done this?
Sure. So this kind of builds on being linguistically accessible and being able to speak to people at a level where they're going to understand it. And again, it's the way I always do it when I'm doing an intake with somebody is, you know, I ask them their story and then I tell them what possibilities there are for them. For most of our Afghan clients, we're talking about asylum. There may be people who are eligible for adjustment of status. There may be people who their only option is TPS. There may be people coming here who came in through the southern border and their only option is to go through the removal proceeding process right now. So explaining what we can and cannot do for them is very important. We don't want to give anybody false hope. And like we mentioned earlier, rumors spread like wildfire for this community. So, I mean, every immigrant community, but the Afghans are very good at telling each other information. It's not always accurate information. And what happened in one case is not always going to be available to another case. So it's important to make sure that people understand exactly how the facts of their case affect what can happen to them and through the legal process. One thing that I find very helpful is to make sure that they understand the process in their own language. Working with interpreters here can be very, very helpful. Even for people who speak some level of English, there are just going to be nuances that may not be easily understood in English, but if accurately translated, can be understood more easily. It's important to make sure the correct language is used here. Like, don't use Farsi and Dari are mutually intelligible, but they're not entirely the same language. So there will be sometimes Afghans say, oh yes, I understand Farsi, but they may not have all exactly the same language. So there can be translation errors there. Another thing I find helpful is to use resources that are in Dari and Farsi, or is it Dari and Pashto? And the reason why I say that is that as a legal practitioner, I'm pretty comfortable with everything. I understand everything in English, but being able to give them something in their own language If they can read or have somebody read it to them, it makes a lot more sense. And I can't, I can't recommend enough. Human Rights First has done a lot of translations of very important documents like the I-589, the asylum application. They give lists of what to bring to asylum interviews, of questions to expect in asylum interviews, but they also go through family reunification, TPS, how to apply for a work authorization, how to apply for humanitarian parole, and then a bunch of like, know your rights. Like if you're a student, what are your rights? If you're working in the US, what are your rights? These are all things that are really important. And the fact that they have put those into Dari and Pashto is extremely important. And so if I can give people resources in their own language, I do. And then just going back to being, using your clear language, defining everything, bring it back to a very basic level. And then as far as working through the steps, giving them, this is step 1, this is step 2, this is step 3, organizing things in steps or in bullet points, so it really breaks it down into how the process is going to happen for them.
Thank you, Kristen. Those are really good points. A couple people are asking in the chat if a link could be sent to those Dari and Pashto documents. So Kristen, if you happen to have that easily accessible, would you mind sharing it? If not, we can make sure to get it to Switchboard to share out with the presentation.
Yes,
And
I have, actually, just to interrupt, I have it, I'll drop it in the chat. If people can't see it, then we'll try to figure out a way to send it to everybody.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Perfect. So those are all some great tips. Ahmad, I wanted to give you a chance. Do you have any additional thoughts or tips on communicating legal processes to our clients?
Thank you so much, Ms. Ashley. I apologize for that. Yes, I think the one thing that the communication is most important, and I believe giving additional information to the interpreter, make sure that the interpreter and the client understand each other, because we do have several types of dialect in Afghanistan, even with Dari slash Farsi and Pashto. So this is one important thing that we have an issue most of the time when we talking with the clients. So the first thing that I believe would be better if we ask through the interpreter from the client if they understand the interpreter or not. So if they understand, then we can proceed. If not, at least we would have if we could have another option to request a different interpreter on the spot for the same dialect, or it would be better if we can ask the client that which dialect of Pashto or Dari, okay, but which dialect of Pashto they are speaking, because Pashto from some provinces close to the Pakistan, like Host province and Paktika, they're totally different. And Wazir Pashto is totally different. Pashto from southern Afghanistan, they don't understand each other, even they're both speaking Pashto. Yeah, to make sure the dialect, there's no different dialect speaking between the interpreter and the client, that would be much better. Yes.
Thank you so much. So now everybody will jump back to Farzad. You already got a preview of this question. You mentioned the Farzad that based on the intake you've completed with him, that he's eligible for asylum. He asks you, how do we do that? Or what's asylum? How might you answer him? So we'll jump back to the Slido. Please use the Slido so that we can make sure everybody can see it. We can all read everyone's feedback. How would you answer Farzad when he wants to know, how do you apply for asylum? Oh, there we go. Use an interpreter for sure. If If you're not a legal professional already and you get the feeling someone could be eligible, definitely refer them to an attorney and make sure the attorney knows what language they need to speak with. Like Kristen explained, maybe having some printouts in their language would be helpful. Use an interpreter that has a legal background if possible. Someone's given us the whole breakdown of how to apply for asylum. I love it. Pull up the instructions from USCIS, plain language for sure, for sure. Participants, anything to add?
I think importantly, just mentioning the length of time the process can take, because not everyone is automatically eligible for the expedited adjudication. And that, as you've mentioned earlier, you know, that Afghans talk to each other and then that information kind of and the rumors circulate. So I think it's important just to be clear for your client in your situation, this is, you know, is how long we'd expect this to go. But, you know, these are all the various things that might happen to make your case longer or shorter, that sort of thing.
Definitely. We've got taking small steps to explain the process. Yeah.
If I could jump in, I just to go off what Harriet is saying and as mentioned before, you know, there's patience required on both sides, and it's hard. You know, I believe it would be hard for an applicant to understand the whole process. We don't even understand it sometimes. And you know, saying how long that can take. They're anxious, of course, and they're anxious for their families. And then, of course, we on the other side are very busy and want to, you know, help as many people as possible, as quickly as possible. And it doesn't always work that way. I'll just say I recently had a case. It took 6 very long interviews to get from I'm afraid of the Taliban to the Taliban actually made me sign a document to free me from detention, where I had to admit that if I came back to this certain place, I would be hanged. It took 6 very, very long hours or more to get to that point. And it's important for the client to know that drawing out that information can take a very long time, because they're oftentimes very reticent in the first or second, or in my case, even 5th interview to give that level of detail. So patience on both sides is crucial to the entire process, I would say.
Definitely, definitely. I'm going to keep us moving, just keeping an eye on the time. So thank you everyone for your feedback there. Again, some general tips on this topic. Start with a basic description of what's being applied for. Clearly explain what clients can and cannot do based on their status, and describe what information is needed to support their application. And then again, use the interpreter and make sure that you are confirming understanding that your client's understanding you and that you're understanding them by paraphrasing and just restating what's been discussed. We have a decent amount of time left for some Q&A. There are 2 questions that have already been shared that I'd like to present to our panelists, but if you have a question that you haven't asked, please use the Q&A, submit your question, and we will do our best to get it answered. The first one came pretty early on. It says, what are some good resources for Afghan clients who are learning to read and write English? Just wondering if you have come across anything that might be helpful for clients. And that would, of course, help your communication with them.
Well, I know for me, since I come from a refugee background, you know, I work with the services agencies, both resettlement and then people who step in after resettlement services end. Almost all these social services agencies have some sort of funding that allows them to do ESL, English as a second language. So getting people enrolled in those, and for most of these people, because they receive public benefits in some form, they are eligible to take these classes for free through the social services agencies. If those aren't available in their area, I would check with local libraries. They often do. As somebody points out, yes, adult education always has English as a second language. So look for community college or any sort of educational center that does that sort of thing. Sometimes if you look at like alternative high schools, they will often let people who are adults enroll to take English classes there. So that is something that can be done. And then, yeah, they should just, I know it's easy to, you know, they'll listen to Afghan music and Afghan TV and things like that, but they should try listening to some English TV, English music, things like that. And that's just a way to kind of hear the words repeated more in a context that people use it every day. So those are things that I suggest. And then USA Learned, I have not looked at that, but Ashley says that Ashley Huber here says it's a good website. So I recommend that people check it out. I'm going to check it out myself.
Thank you, Kristen. Thank you. There's another example in the chat, it's just to us, so I'll read it. Encourage community partners to be responsive to needs of Afghans and other immigrant groups. For example, hosting English classes at places of employment. Another question that we have, is there a way to speak persuasively to an Afghan with a failed SIV application to apply for asylum, even though he has a strong and valid asylum case? I know we don't want to give specific legal advice, but are there any tips here on how we can better communicate the pros and cons of different statuses?
I'm sorry, I don't know the answer to this question and I'm hoping to learn myself.
I mean, sure, I can jump in on what I would do in this situation. So if I have somebody that comes to me and they have multiple avenues, like I have had people who, you know, are eligible for SIB, eligible for asylum, eligible for TPS. And the important thing I think here is to talk about timing and what's going to be most advantageous for them. In the case of somebody who has like a failed SIV application, we have to see where they're at in the process. Like, do they need to seek a new COM approval? Do they need to appeal a COM approval? These are all things that can take a lot of time, especially right now, COM approvals, there's just thousands of them out there. For those of that's the chief admission approval for SIVs. People don't know that. It takes a long time. They don't have enough staff. They're working very hard on it, but it's going to take a long time to get an application either appealed and put back in place or to do a new application. And explaining to them that, you know, with asylum, if you came here through the OAW, OAR evacuation process, asylum, you're going to get, you are eligible for expedited asylum. You're going to have your interview very quickly. You're probably going to have a decision made on that asylum case, hopefully, fingers crossed, before you would ever get your new COM approval. And so explaining like, this is how it's going to be advantageous to you. I mean, this is how it changes your outlook. I mean, obviously, if you are eligible for SIV, you get it in, you adjust your status, you get your green card right away. With asylum, you have to do 2 steps. You have to win your asylum, and then you have to apply for a green card. That can take a little bit longer there, but it gets you to a more permanent and safe status sooner. You can also emphasize benefit, you know, how that affects their ability to apply for benefits in the United States. Like having asylum gives you benefits in basically indefinitely. So if you lose a job or if you have a large family to support, sometimes it's very important to have. And then just explaining timelines, explaining how you get to the same result, no matter what. So, you know, that's that. But you also have to keep in mind when you're working with the client that ultimately it's their case. So you can explain all the pros and cons of everything. And if they say, no, I want to go through SIV, I want to go through SIV, that's their case. And that's what they get to go through. And then I see your follow-up thing. Pride seems to be a big block for those who work with the US military. you can also explain to them that they can get asylum having worked with the US military. I mean, that is a particular social group that is immutable. They cannot change the fact that they worked for the US Army or the US military, and that is perfectly valid grounds to get asylum. And they still get to the same point. They still get to tell their story. And that, you know, having the SIV designation doesn't matter. I mean, it's just a designation. It doesn't matter as far as what their ultimate goals are, or it's not going to keep them from getting to where they want to get to. That makes sense.
Yeah. No, thank you very much. I do want to just restate that we are focusing on the topic at hand today. We're not talking about specific legal options, and we can't help people with their cases in this webinar, unfortunately. So just making sure that all of our expectations are set appropriately. We had two, I don't know where the one went, but we had questions in the chat. Ideas how to explain to the men that it is important that they get and keep a job prior to quitting and expecting DSHS to provide all their funds. And within that, there's another question about gender roles. In healthcare situations, women need healthcare, but their father or brother insists on accompanying them or speaking for them. So maybe, Ahmad, do you have any ideas on how we can work with men in those situations?
Yes, Ms. Ashley, I already put something on the chat as well to reply to that question. So the better way to involve the medical provider on that situation, and they should already explain about the HIPAA rules, which is the HIPAA based on the HIPAA rules. So there is not allowed to any other person to be involved in their medical questionnaire or the medical exam. When the provider, it should be only provider and the patient, unless we need get an authorization from the patient, and then they can speak on behalf of the patient.
Thank you. And then how might we explain to men that it is important that they get and keep a job prior to quitting and expecting DSHS to provide all their funds? Do you have any thoughts on that, or anyone else?
I mean, I guess my thought there would be to you'd almost have to rely on your cultural stereotypes there, and your gender stereotypes to be, you know, this is a culture where it's, you know, it's male dominant. You can talk about how, you know, this is your opportunity to, you know, provide for your family. You're going to get more funds working than you will from DSHS. You know, if you have an ultimate goal of, you know, having a car or buying a house, you know, moving to a community with other Afghans around, you need to have the funds to do that. And you're not going to have that with any sort of public benefits you're getting. So, you know, it's a matter of taking care of your family. And that, you know, there are lots of opportunities here in the US where you're going to earn more income than you would have back home. This is your chance to, you know, kind of make a really wonderful life for yourself and your family. That would be my tactic on how to explain to a father or husband about why it's important to keep a job in the United States.
Thank you. Thank you. I don't see any other questions in our Q&A. So just a last call in a way, because we are coming up to 2 o'clock Eastern. If you have a question for our panelists, please type it in now. We did prepare a couple questions that I would like to ask. So back to you, Ahmad. We talked about a lot here today. What do you think the #1 thing to keep in mind is when we're working with Afghan clients?
Thank you so much, Ms. Ashley. Again, as I mentioned earlier, by giving additional information to the interpreter, or in another word, a short briefing about the client to the interpreter, and make sure you do have interpreter to eliminate the language barrier, we would be able to achieve that goal. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you. And Harriet, I think that there was a tip or a suggestion that you had wanted to share today. I want to make sure we give you the space to do that.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Ashley. So this is a follow-up to my let's use technology to communicate if we can. When I've had clients who do not read or write even in their own language, that can be quite challenging for some of us who are just not, you kind of have to get creative. And the way that I overcame this situation was using WhatsApp. A lot of Afghan clients are more comfortable using WhatsApp because for anyone who is tech-minded, it's end-to-end encrypted. So it cannot be hacked. So the Taliban cannot see what you're exchanging with your client. And I think that can be very, very worrying for them, especially if they're coming out of that very negative situation. They may be afraid that their communications can be reviewed by foreign governments. So I use the voice note app, voice note in WhatsApp, and I would be able to basically tell my client, hey, this is what we discussed today. These are the next steps I need you to take. Here's what we're going to need to do to prepare for your interview, or I've sent an Uber to collect you, those sorts of things. And as their English became better, sometimes they would be able to respond to me directly. Other times they would have a friend or a family member who spoke English communicate with me or explain to them what I'd said. So again, I think that's just finding different ways to get around some of the barriers that we have when our clients cannot read or write, even in their native language.
Thank you. Thank you. And a question came through in the chat, and this will have to be our last one, unfortunately. It says, I'm in a unique situation as I work at a school, but I wonder how you navigate conflict with men who do not want to work with women. So again, those gender differences, difficulties, whatever we want to call it. Any final tips for that? Any one of our participants or panelists?
Miss Ashley, in that case, if it is at the school, so it depends if it is the students in a high school or middle school, the better way to explain this kind of situation with their parents and explain to their parents that they need to explain it to their children.
Okay. Marianne, Harriet, Kristen, do you have anything to add to this situation, or just the general male and female? Oh, the parents are the ones who don't want to talk to the women in the school. More specific tips.
I don't know that this is a tip, but I think coming from a Western culture, we have to be very aware that we have to empathize to a point, with the others, with people coming from a Middle Eastern background. It is so different, and I think sometimes we just have to remember to put ourselves in their shoes and recognize why perhaps they have those feelings and do our very best to come at it from that direction. And I don't know that I have an answer, but I think that would be how I try and approach it.
Thank you, Harriet.
Also, Miss Ashley, probably that family may have a social worker or a case manager for sure. So the better way, because they're receiving all the benefit through the social worker, case manager. So the better way to reach out to them, or in another word, resettlement agencies.
Okay, yeah, looping in their other service providers. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Okay, so we do have to keep moving because we've got less than 2 minutes left. So if we can jump back to the slides, these will come out to you in the follow-up, but some recommended resources. Cultural Orientation Resource Exchange has an Afghan cultural backgrounder, which is very informative. Switchboard has a 5-part series, Cultural and Practical Considerations for Working with Afghan Clients, that can also give a bit more background. Center for Immigration Studies, Immigrant Literacy, Self-Assessment versus Reality, just a little bit more about the literacy component. And then IU School of Medicine, information about our Afghan community. So again, that will give you a general overview of that. So hopefully now that we're at the end of the session, you have learned how to name strategies for conducting efficient, culturally appropriate intakes for potential Afghan clients with low literacy levels, communicate more clearly with Afghan clients about the requirements for immigration benefits, and ask linguistically accessible questions to gather information from Afghan clients in order to prepare their cases. We need you to break your phone back out again, please, and help us to help you scan the QR code or click the link in the chat to access our feedback survey. It's 5 questions, 60 seconds, and it helps us to improve future training and technical assistance. The link's in the chat, and you will also find it in the follow-up emails. I still think I'm seeing some tips coming in the chat, so make sure you're glancing at that as well. And then it is 2 o'clock, so we should probably jump to our very last slide. So staying connected. For more training and technical assistance, stay connected with Switchboard. Email us at switchboard@rescue.org. Visit us at www.switchboardta.org. Follow us on social media at SwitchboardTA. On behalf of all of us at Switchboard, thank you for learning with us, and we hope to see you again soon. Thank you all for being here.